get into the meeting. Oh, I have to share the slides. Okay, but I can just give a small overview. I just want to check if Uzi is online yet. If not, then we can go directly to Christiaan. Letting him now. Okay, let's just let him settle. Yeah, so we've got 2 sessions scheduled for tonight. The first one is from Vuzi Masimula. He is also from Sabre Analytics, along with Sven and a few others who's here as well. And he's going to tell us a bit about dynamic subscriptions for Power BI reports. And then after that, we're going to have a slightly longer session with Christiaan Koch, who's sitting there in the center. I don't know if you guys can see him. He's going to talk to us about automating Power BI deployments with DevOps. So yeah, we'll see about that. And he is also a returning customer. He's done a session or 2 here at the BI user group. So it's good to have you back, Christiaan. Thanks for joining us again. And then just some Teams etiquette. We would like to see your pretty faces if you're online. So if you're comfortable, please enable your video and keep your audio muted. And use the raise hand option if you have any questions during the presentation. So I just want to check with Vuzi. Are you ready? I know you just joined. I heard that you made it. Are you there? I hope you can hear me this entire time.
No, I can hear you, Stefan.
Are you ready?
Yes, just one moment.
It's about to be.
Setting up my station.
That was a very positive yes. Okay, Vuzi, do you need a few minutes because we can ask Christiaan to go first. I think you're ready, right?
Oh, no pressure. Right?
No pressure. Yeah, I hope you finish the slides.
Slides at the back there.
Yeah, Vuzi, would you like?
The best slides done in the last minute, so it's all right.
Mostly.
Okay. I've been trying. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Vuzi, we're going to let Christiaan go first, and then when he's done, we're going to go back to you. So we're going to let Christiaan run for about 40 minutes, and then the last 20 minutes is going to be yours. Cool.
Okay, no problem.
Should I stand or is it fine if I just
Stand.
Whatever you're comfortable with.
No, sit.
I can sit. All right, and the audio is how audible is it online? Does anyone know?
The mics.
Yeah, mic is in the middle somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you for that. Okay. All right. Let me just start my presentation. And Teams is notifications anyway. That's it. All right. Welcome everyone. Today I'll be taking you through automating Power BI deployments with DevOps. My name is Christiaan Koch. I know it's on the surname pronunciation, otherwise, yeah, it may get a bit weird. All right. So I would introduce myself, but we're a bit short on time, so I'll just go through our to-do list for today. First of all, I'll be taking you through our team's pre-automation pane prior to actually implementing our deployment pipelines and setting everything up. It was a bit of a doozy. Then I'll take you through how the solution looks, how the different parts of it interact, and those kind of stuff. Then we'll do a bit of a tech deep dive, so if a couple of you doze off, I wouldn't mind too much. Now, after that, I'll be taking you through the general benefits we found with the solution, and then naturally you need to place yourself under some kind of scrutiny when you design, right? So I'll obviously be going through a couple of areas of improvement as well. All right, let's get into it. Pre-automation pane. So first things first, we have one main data custodian for our team who is a manager. So what does the data custodian do in our situation? They pretty much deploy our Power BI reports for us, maintain the general environment, right? So thing with Intel Dev is we don't actually have access to production data. I'm not supposed to see, for example, Stefan's salary. That would probably get me in trouble. So essentially what we did is we had...
She said part of the presentation.
Thank you. I'll assume we're still good. Okay, so we pretty much scheduled a weekly gap with our data custodian, like once a week, and then we would sit with him and deploy things for like an hour. Now, this was kind of painful initially. We published the reports manually. We went to change all the parameters inside of the reports and then push it up. Later on, we had some deployment pipelines on the website, but it was still not enough because we deployed like 7 workspaces at a time. So yeah, it got a bit dicey. Now, over time, he received more responsibility because he's really good at his job, and thus it meant that we could maybe deploy once every 2-3 weeks. So, why is my Teams meeting notification in the way? Okay, so in terms of deployment, as I mentioned, we don't have production access, so we sit with our stakeholder. Now, this also meant that because we're doing a lot of things manually, human error was a big factor. Like I would say 30% of our deployments usually ended with like some kind of problem that we had to fix immediately because different people were working on the reports. And as you know, that if you do that on a deployment pipeline, only one person actually owns the parameters. So yeah, sometimes the parameters would be incorrectly configured, but we couldn't check it, so things would break. We also had a separate team on inside the company that we did deployments for. So it's like a sister team of sorts, and their deployments flow through us. Now, anyway, so as I mentioned, rollbacks was a bit tedious because issues would arise quite frequently. And what we do is literally go edit the report, immediately push it, and then try and find some time with our data custodian to go deploy that stuff, right? Now, get tab to Teams. There we go. So turnaround time, because we sat with the stakeholders once a week, we pretty much have to wait an entire week to deploy features. This could range something from like a label change all the way to a big feature that may have taken like 3 or 4 days. Either way, guys are only getting it once a week. If a bug stays, or if a bug gets into prod and it's not like super pressing, it's probably going to stay there for a week as well, which obviously is not a great experience for your clients, right? And last of the pre-automation pain, we had, if there was a big production issue, you would pretty much be scrambling, right? You would almost immediately have to like WhatsApp call the data custodian in order to get in touch with him. You'd have to step away from more important duties. So he handles the company's billing. So essentially billing's not rolling for however long you need to keep him busy, which could be like 3 hours. And if he's on leave, you pretty much just start praying and setting up a CV so that you can send it to a different company in case things go extra pear-shaped. All right, so in terms of the solution architecture, first I'm just going to list out the different components, and then on the right-hand side, you'll see there's like a little diagram, and we'll start working through that. So first thing that we require is Azure DevOps, which is broken down into 3 different sections, as you would expect generally with DevOps. You have your Git repository, your build pipelines, release pipelines, your Power BI online environment or your Power BI tenant, and then last but certainly not least, the Azure app registrations. So Azure app registrations, I'll just be calling them service principals throughout the rest of this talk. And app registrations are pretty much just an application that you create on Azure, and then you can grant it permissions on your tenant. But I'll go through that in a bit on the line. So if we take a look at that first picture, right, you have your Git repository, and we broke that down into 2 separate components. So that is your shared configs, which is pretty much any kind of PowerShell configuration, parameter mapping, gateway setup configuration, anything like that. And then you have workspace folders. So that one I kind of rolled up, but pretty much we have a folder per workspace. So let's say we need something for our recruitment department, they get a folder. We need something for our HR department, they get a folder. So you have a folder per department. This is a bit more important later on. And yeah, so then for build pipelines, how that works is, as you can see, that shared configs has like a 1-to-1 correlation with build pipelines. So all of your configurations, PowerShell settings, what have you, that all gets put into one specific build pipeline. So you have one artifact that you keep maintaining over time. Because generally, you wouldn't want to keep redeploying the same data over and over. You want to make your deployments small and very granular, depending on what actually changes. Next of all, you would have a pipeline per workspace. So for recruitment, you have one. For HR, you have one, and so forth. This gives you nice granular artifacts to work with as well. And later down the line, you'll see that you'll also be able to roll back workspaces specifically instead of just doing like a blanket rollback of your entire environment. Cool. So we don't have a specifically advanced branching strategy or anything, But if you merge into the develop branch, what will happen is you will trigger a development stage deployment, which, if that's successful, will go over into a QA stage deployment. Similarly, if you merge into a release branch, what will happen is you will deploy to the pre-production stage, and then after that, if that's successful, you go into the production stage. I'll touch a bit more on these ones in a little bit. Yep. Then on the Power BI tenant, similarly, you have a develop workspace, QA, pre-production, and production. Now, pre-production and production, we have absolutely no access to. And thus, we kind of made two service principals. So one has access to our dev and QA environment, and the other one has access to, well, pre-prod and prod. So this gives us nice separation of concerns. The dev team can't do anything sketchy. And if you want to do anything sketchy, you would have to go through a couple of commits on your repo. You would have to get approval on your pull request, merge that into the release branch. And at that point, you have a huge paper trail. So a lot of people are getting fired if that gets through, and it's super obvious.
Effective collusion.
Yeah, it's kind of making sure that other people get in trouble with you. You don't want to be the only one shouted at, right? All right, so now I'll get a bit more into the technical details. Let me just grab a sip of water.
I have a quick question. You mentioned earlier that you had one pipeline per workspace.
Yes.
So, but then you also had separate workspaces for dev, QA, pre-prod, and prod.
So workspace, I meant as a concept. So you have a crew, right?
Okay.
But you have different subsections for pipeline stages, is kind of how we're referring to it throughout this talk. So a dev workspace and a QA workspace aren't seen as different workspaces because it's the same data or reports. It's just different data depending on the environment.
Makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. All right, so service principles. If anyone nods off, now would be a good time. So for this presentation's purposes, what I'll be referring to as a service principal is an Azure application registration. Now, this pretty much just has permissions to perform specific actions against your Power BI online tenant. And we use delegate permissions instead of application level permissions. So what does this mean? Essentially, you just treat your app registration as if it was a user. So you give user level permissions on your workspaces, on your gateways, data sources, things like that. So you have very granular control and you know exactly what this thing has access to and what it doesn't, right? Now, first of all, before you can start implementing a service principal, you have to give it general access to your Power BI tenant through the admin settings page. So that would be on the right on that image. You would pretty much just fill in your Azure application registration into that little box over there. Preferably you put it in a group so that someone can manage it. But yeah, once it has access to that, it pretty much just means it can ping the environment or the tenant, right? It doesn't mean it has blanket access to everything. So as I mentioned, actual access is controlled on an object level, so workspace or whatever. On the bottom right, you'll see that I tried to kind of ping a workspace that I didn't have access to, and it'll just block you outright. So this is pretty safe. But the thing is, considering how most environments work in Redshape, this is probably the implementation phase where you'll have the most difficulty getting approval. But once this approval is done, you're pretty much sorted. All right, so you don't need any specific licensing level for your service principal, considering that it's an Azure object. So if you have like a pre-and user capacity in your workspace, you don't need to assign any kind of special things to your service principal in order to use it in that capacity. It's still limited to the user. All right, and then last of all, we just store all of the different client secrets that we use throughout the process in an Azure Key Vault. This pretty much just allows us to roll back on keys or roll forward with keys without having too much pain with replacing keys in every single release pipeline, so going forward. All right, I'm just gonna breeze through this real quick, but in case anyone's interested in what permissions that service principal needs, first of all, you need dataset read write all. There's pretty much, it sounds sketchy, but it's not. So thing is, this pretty much just allows you to map out your gateways, map out parameters, see what datasets are available, and so forth. You can't actually see any of the data. It's purely metadata driven. And you also can't see any visuals. but that's exactly why it's split out into data sets and report level permissions. Report permissions, on the other hand, are very sketchy, right? Because what you can do is you can download a PDF version of your reports, or just download the reports if you have read permissions. You don't even need write permissions. So in our tenant, we generally just avoid using the report permission entirely. I wanted to use it, but yeah, I got Stern talking to. So yeah, we don't do that anymore. Next up, we have workspace.readAll. Naturally, you don't want any write permissions because otherwise you could just add a user onto a workspace and just social engineer your way onto it. But yeah, this pretty much just allows you to see every single workspace that the service principal has access to. And yeah, that's honestly all we need from it. Next up is gateway.readAll. Just gives you an idea of every single data source it has access to, as well as all the named gateways. So this one is very useful, and I'll explain a bit more later on how we handle all these different permissions and stuff. Last one, which is optional technically, if you want, is pipeline.deploy_all, which, if any of you know the online pipeline deployment pipelines, it's pretty much just that. It allows you to push items from a preceding environment to a subsequent environment. So yeah, very simple. That's all that's used for. All right, so as I'm sure many of you have questions, security-wise, what happens if the service principal was compromised? Let's say someone gets client secret. What can they actually do? They can delete your data sets. That's it. Good talk. Anyway, yeah, so realistically, with the current design, this is no longer an issue. Previously, when I had this talk, there was an issue because everything was ID-based, now everything is dynamic. So you can effectively delete your entire prod environment and it will just factory reset. So yeah, that's quite good. I may or may not have tested that in actual prod.
Just a question, can this happen regardless of what permissions you specify for the service principal, or is this as if you...
Oh, this is if someone gets your client secrets. Because we provide pretty much the minimum possible permissions to your service principal, the worst they can do is delete your data sets, which will pretty much just like nuke your reports.
Okay.
Yeah, but they can't do stuff like add themselves to a workspace, download your reports, or anything like that.
Okay.
Well, I guess they can deploy your broken release. Yeah, there's also that, I suppose. But for that, they need access to Azure DevOps. So it's not that much of a concern. So in that scenario, we just reset the client secrets of the service principals and then put them in key vault. Once that's done, everything works again and it's secured again. So you don't have to worry about it. I mean, a client secret does take 60 minutes, I believe, or not a client secret, a token takes 60 minutes to expire. So there would technically be that 60 minutes where they can keep nuking your reports, but yeah, can't do much about that, hey? So generally that would be a higher up concern if it actually gets leaked. But yeah, and then let's take a bit of a look at the Git repository layout. So if you guys aren't super interested, we can skip over this a little bit, just to show you what things look like. First of all, we have our DevOps folder. So that was that configs, or shared configs build pipeline that we had. So that is your common configs, which is all your PowerShell scripts for, say, mapping out your gateways, deploying pipelines, setting up your refresh schedules, and so forth. So pretty much if you want to do anything weird, you would have to do it through these scripts. It would have to go through Git, get approvals multiple times. So yeah, likelihood of someone doing anything that's frowned upon is quite low. And then last of all, you have a DevOps config that is unfortunately in Excel. I would have liked to put this in a database, but hey. So yeah, it's a binary file, so the change control is a bit shifty, so you would have to check what goes on, like actually go to the file when you review a PR and so. But generally, this is quite safe as well. But yeah, that's where you set up things like your gateway mappings, parameters, and yeah, that's basically it. Cool. So now as we look at the actual workspace reports, and yes, I did notice the weird naming scheme of reports, workspace reports. That is an oversight on our part. But, but yeah, so per workspace, so let's say recruitment, you would have the refresh schedules for each report. And then you would also have the actual physical .pbix reports inside of those folders. Just as like a little idea, the top right is what a refresh schedule would look like. So you can say on which days you want to refresh, at what times, and so forth. Unfortunately, we didn't do anything advanced with this yet, but I'm sure you can do some pretty cool stuff with this. All right. So this is probably the most confusing part of the conversation. So just before I actually start discussing any of this, you'll see that anything in gray is calculated and anything in blue is actually a drop-down. So we don't actually manually go type out this. We have a different section where you just list all the workspaces and then you just select and drop down what you want to match against things. So this comes in handy later on where we start doing a bit heavier stuff. I'll show that on the next slide. So first of all, how you would set up a data set. You don't need any IDs. You don't need any workspace IDs. So yeah, you specify the workspace name from the dropdown, pop in the data set, and then you're done on that front. Now for gateways, because our environment is a bit less than ideal in terms of how it's set up in naming scheme, what we did is we specified per environment what a gateway's equivalent would be for that environment. So let's say we have a gateway for all of our Azure databases. For develop, it's Azure QA. For QA, it's also QA. For production, it will have different names and so forth. But you'll see generally what we do here is we match our pre-prod and production environments. So this is kind of useful later on due to the fact that you can simulate your production deployments in pre-prod. And if they work, you can just deploy to prod because it'll work. But it also prevents you from breaking your production environment preemptively. So yeah, for data sources, we do something similar. We just map out the name, similar thing with gateways. Now, last thing on this front of the Excel spreadsheet, I so hope to one day scrap this spreadsheet. Yeah, so you have parameters. You just pick the workspace dataset combination because sometimes datasets can have the same names in workspaces and so. And then you specify parameter and then per environment what that value would be. It also scales quite nicely because if you have additional environments that you're adding in, so let's say you have a sandbox environment that's based on your production data, you can just add an extra column and then just adjust your configs slightly. And then that can actually fit in as well. All right, then for dataset gateway mappings, you just choose the combination of workspace datasets as well as your data source and your gateway. And then you're done. So yeah, that is all of the Excel config.
Oh, snap, there's one chair. Oh, there's two of us.
Everyone,
Who's that?
Feel free to go grab a chair.
HR violation, but
I'm just gonna pause it for a second. No worries.
The chairs are coming.
Christiaan.
You're halfway through the book now. Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to, everybody move up one and then we'll begin to, can you get it down there?
No, we'll probably just sit in the back here.
I'll just sit here.
Oh, that's cool. I can just shift over a second. All right, cool. So now we're gonna go over the build pipeline a bit. So whenever data is merged into your develop or release branch, naturally two pipelines will be executed. So one would be your workspace specific pipeline. So that would say the recruitment, and the other one would be your shared configs. So let's just make sure that in every batch, everything is kind of the same. If you have, say, 5 workspaces that you want to deploy, it would be 5 workspace specific pipelines and 1 shared configs pipeline that matches each of those. All right, now, as I mentioned, each workspace has its own build pipeline. This allows very granular control over your releases and also allows us to keep a couple of backups per workspace. Yeah, that is pretty much it. So on the left-hand side, yeah.
Sorry, one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to have one pipeline for all the workspaces? You just didn't decide not to do that way?
Yes, it is possible to do that. But the thing is, what if you have 50 reports, you did recent deployments and everything, and now you want to roll back something that wasn't necessarily recent? How would you identify that? Exactly. So how we identify that is you just go to the related workspace release, and then you can just scroll back on that individually without having any effect on anything else.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the reason why we went with that. It does seem a bit overkill if you look at it at first glance. Also, the dates are kind of old because this was a presentation I may have swiped from last year. Anyway, so for the DevOps release section, as I mentioned, each workspace has its own release, and this triggers only when the workspace-specific DevOps pipeline is complete. So if recruitment pipeline is done, it'll start the release. Now, you'll see that's broken into two sections. You have your development and QA, and you'll see that doesn't exactly match the bottom section. And that's because we have access to Dev and QA. So we can kind of refresh the reports whenever we want to. We baked in a refresh section in, wow, my mouse is so slow, in here. So that's kind of part of that. But for production, what we do is we first do deployments, and then we have a separate task for refreshing. So that might not seem like a great idea, right? But the thing is, what happens if you have a report that you don't have access to, that hasn't been used in, what was it, 2 months, and then it gets disabled? How do you re-enable that without having to ask someone? Well, turns out if you just refresh the report, it re-enables. So an easy way to get things back up and running is to just rerun that task, and then things are back up. It also allows you to cater for things where you did a deployment, but let's say you have an external dependency, like let's say a spreadsheet just needs to be updated. Now you can just refresh your reports again, and it'll be good. So it works quite well in terms of just making sure you're not backing yourself into a corner by only refreshing your stuff once or allowing yourself to do that. All right, so good thing I'm halfway through my talk, because I think I might actually be able to end this in like 15 minutes. All right, so this is probably going to be the longest section. I'm going to go through like the generic actions within each stage of the pipeline. So generally you'll see it goes into 2 phases, right? You have your developing QA, and then pre-prod and production goes together. So that's for a very specific reason, which I'll get into just now. General idea with our pipelines is that you first get your ingredients before baking the cake, rather than grabbing your ingredients as you're going along, which, you know, could potentially lead to you breaking stuff midway through and then not being able to revert back. So we first make sure we have everything. So we get all of our secrets from Key Vaults. That would be stuff like your client secrets, tenant ID, what have you. And then once you have that, you get a OAuth2 token that has deploy all permissions, data set rewrite all permissions, and that is it for that session. Some of the other stuff is used by, you'll see some yellow actions, which are custom connectors on DevOps. So they use the other permissions, and that just allows us to do a couple of things. So you did see that I specified the workspaces based on name rather than ID, right? Now, the thing is, we actually get a full list of all the workspaces that a service principal has access to, and then we name match it, which sounds dumb, right? But think of it this way. We can add prefixes to it, and then we can scale it indefinitely to multiple environments. So it also kind of forces my team to have good naming standards. So let's say you have recruitment, so then you would add a prefix dev recruitment in order to actually run a dev environment. If that doesn't exist, that get ID check will fail. So this is an easy way to always make sure that you're deploying to the correct thing. It's mostly a once-off setup though. Now, once we've gotten that ID, what we do is, sounds stupid, you cancel all the active refreshes in that workspace. Now, why would you want to do that? First of all, let's say you do a release and something takes 40 minutes to refresh. Now you notice that the logic in that report is incorrect. Do you really want to wait 40 minutes before you deploy that again? Probably not. So what we do is we have a forced cancel of all refreshes. Once that goes through, we continue with the rest of the process. So that just ensures that there's no weird states in any of the workspace items and so. And after the deployment, we refresh everything anyway. So it should be good. So now what we do is we take all of the reports from our Git repository and push that up to DevOps. Not DevOps, the workspace. Now, how this works is it overwrites your reports. So this is important in if you want to roll back. So it effectively makes sure that everything from a specific build version. So whenever you had like specific configurations, everything, it'll keep it the exact same. Sorry, let me just take a real quick drink. So it overwrites your reports in that workspace. And once that's done, we take ownership over the reports in that workspace, or basically the data sets. So the reason why we have to do that is a lot of times the owner of a data set is the only person who can configure things like parameters, gateways, and so forth. So, but we also want to allow the devs on the team to kind of have some autonomy. So I copied this change ownership action into pre-prod, but technically it's not necessary. We have this in the dev workspace where it's necessary because you pretty much want to be able to mess around with your data sets and see what's possible and what's not, but still be able to factory reset and make sure that everything's in check after you're done. So you would just re-roll back on a release on dev, for example. Now, once you have ownership, you can start setting things up from parameters from, let's say, your Excel configs. So map everything out. Then once that's done, you're technically able to point to the correct gateway. So unfortunately, gateways can only be set to a specific location once the parameters are defined, right? Now, then you map out your gateway mappings. It kind of does all those in batch. At the moment, I am facing a limitation where I can only do this with one gateway at a time. Whereas if you do two, it'll map the first one, unmap the first one when it does the second one as well. So there is that slight limitation, unfortunately. So where we get around that is just placing both the items in data flows and then pointing that to one gateway. So that's a nice workaround for that. Next of all, you just take your JSON files that you configured for the refresh schedules, and then you just push that up to Power BI. The thing is, depending on the environment, we don't actually enable the refresh schedules because we probably double run prod and kill our environments. So instead what we do is we have a environment variable in our keyboard that we just pull in. And then it can say, okay, this is dev or this is QA. So don't run the refresh schedules, things like that. So we have like small exceptions depending on the environment. But yeah, so this we can use to still check if the JSON files and everything are intact. And if that fails, then that obviously means it'll fail in prod as well. Now, for production, that looks extremely similar. The only thing you'll see that's different is that the yellow sections are gone and that the deploy reports via pipeline section is there. So that is equivalent to using the pipeline deploy on the Power BI service if you have those, right? Now, the reason why we do this is with publish reports, you pretty much take your repos data and push that up, right? But if that's dev data and you're deploying to prod, that would kind of mean that you would be pushing your dev data up to prod, and there's a small chance or a non-zero chance that people can make bad decisions off your dev data, or that they can be like, what's going on here? So what we do instead is we push the reports over the pipeline. Now, what this does is it effectively nukes the data in those reports and presents a blank report during the time during nothing is happening, right? What this means is they can not make decisions at all. We'd rather have them not be able to use the reports than have them use bad reports. I did forget to mention a step though. Right after we do this set reports schedules section, the previous pages refresh prod section runs. Now we have a monitoring dashboard, and what this does is we'll refresh all the reports. If they look fine and dandy, we start with the production deploy, which means that production will effectively be the exact same because our configuration is the same thing. Yeah, and once that's done, production is deployed and you can continue on with your life. So deployments usually take us 2 minutes. Rollback is just as quick. We can pretty much tell if there's issues within 5 minutes because we also have a monitoring dashboard. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to showcase that as well, but we have monitoring over pre-prod as well as prod. So you can kind of keep open check. So as I mentioned, we keep at least 3 releases per workspace, so that you can roll back. This could be a couple of months back, and so thing is, I do need senior approval in theory, but I managed to social engineer my way to senior permissions. I'm actually an intermediate. And yeah, so then I can just redeploy a previous successful release. That image is incorrect though, because I would start from pre-prod, so I can trial run that deployment again. And then once that works, I can do prod as well. So yeah, as you can imagine, this is great for my mental health. Previously, I was stressed about deployments. Now I would actually be disappointed in myself if I break prod again. So yeah, ending segment. I didn't list a lot of benefits because most of it was listed throughout the session. But yeah, we can trial run our prod deployments, which, you know, is great. And it's exact deployments. So works pre-prod, will work in prod. We almost don't need our data custodian. Unfortunately, we do have data flows, so we kind of need to set that up as well with him, because that can't be automated at present due to like a manual intervention problem. Then greatly reduces the human error factor. So as you can recall, I mentioned there was an issue where only one person can set the parameters on a pipeline at one time. But now you're using a spreadsheet, so everyone knows what the values are. And if things aren't correct, you'll pick that up in either dev or QA or pre-prod. If you manage to get past those points, it still breaks. There's probably some introspection you need to do. Then this kit as well for rollbacks. So in essence, it also enables full disaster recovery because everything is configured in your Git repo and you can just roll back. So last year, we had a small incident where we had to delete our tenant, or not tenant, but like all of our Power BI reports due to certain data exposure issues. And we were able to pretty much recover everything in half a day with this process. Also, because this is built quite, I would say dynamically, you can slot this into most environments. So I'm currently getting placed on a client. So all I need to do is get key vault set up and get a client secrets, or SOS principal, right? And then I can just slot this in there, which is exactly what I'm planning on doing. All right, areas of improvement. Naturally, there are some problems, i.e. we deploy all of the reports in a specific workspace all at once, which isn't great if you have like super big models, I would assume. But that's something we want to work on. We're just deployed deltas, but that has some problems with rollbacks, which I'm still investigating. I would like to not use spreadsheets because it's not great for comparison. It has like the same effect as a .pbix file where you try and compare something. It's like, I don't know what this is. And I would also, it's kind of unrelated, but I'd like to automate our data flow deployments. So at the moment, this isn't possible from what I've seen. You can implement the process, but there's still like a last process where you have to manually click, okay, this is the gateway I want to connect to, despite specifying it, but that's a different tangent. And then I'd also like to work in automated data source authorization, because at the moment we have a 1 month period where you need to change your password. And yeah, so our data custodian's password changes once a month as well, and all the data sources are dependent on that. Fun. All right, but yeah, that is all from me. Any questions?
We've got about 2 minutes for questions. Thank you very much, Christiaan. That was really great. Yeah, any questions online or in the room?
Your data flows, do they lay also in your Git repo?
Data flows, we'd like to, but yeah, the deployment process isn't as seamless because you have to still specify the gateway. So effectively, if you roll back on your data flows, you would still break them, even if the logic is intact, because you have to manually go specify the gateway. So then you just break it for deployments if you roll back things. So it's something I want to do, but there's some issues. I was chatting to Microsoft about it, but we couldn't come to like a good conclusion as to how to fix that yet.
Because the sad part is that's where the majority of your critical logic is, and you have no history, revision management on that.
We have history on it. We keep in the Git repo, but actually
like
rolling back on
copying,
sucks. Yeah.
Copying.
Yeah, so we can push it to dev and then push it all the way down to production, but it's still painful, which is exactly why we implemented this process. Yeah.
Would have been nice to see your monitoring dashboards.
I mean, if there's time after the fact, I can show you.
You can stick around while after Buzi's section, and then it'd be nice to see that. Yeah. Cool. Well,
That's all.
thank you very much. Yeah, very good. Okay, and then now I want to reintroduce Buzi. I hope you're ready and going to show us some exciting things about dynamic subscriptions for Power BI reports. Buzi, are you ready?
Yes, I am ready.
Cool. You are a presenter, so you should be able to start sharing your screen.
Okay.
And good luck.
Please do let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see you. Before you get started, I just want to say one more thing. We started a little bit late, so I think we're going to run over by about 10 minutes, just to give everyone a heads up. And then we're going to run until 10 past 6. Yeah, take it away, Buzi.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to be talking about dynamic subscriptions. These are specifically for paginated reports. I know some of you guys, for instance, I spoke to one of my colleagues today, and he was like, "Oh, but that's nothing new." Turns out that there is new dynamic subscription for paginated reports. So that's what we will be covering today.
Are you still there? Oh, we have lost him. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not in the meeting. Wait. So it's no use online.
I see him as one of the presenters, yeah.
I'll find him quickly.
Cool. I think while waiting, you want to start showing the monitoring dashboard.
Just hide some unsavory data.
We are recording, just so you know.
Yes, I know. That's exactly why I need to limit what I show.
Always just
Hello, Bushi.
stop recording.
We haven't been able to hear.
Yeah, I mean, if we're not recording,
So you're still there.
but yeah, I'd rather, because otherwise it's 2 recordings, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, hang on until the end then. Okay.
Okay. All right. Just having connection issues. All right. We'll stand by. Thanks.
Just stand by. Are there any more questions for Christian's discussion? While we're waiting, Buzi said he's just having some connection issues and we'll be back shortly.
One question / comment, whatever, right? So you know how you're using pipelines.
Yes.
So the challenge you've got is, remember you said that you have that auditability. I have the same problem, so I'm not judging. I know I have that weakness and I know you have it, right? Because you're pushing stuff into your first workspace and then you're using pipelines from there. Any change that somebody makes into that workspace, so if somebody has contributed permission on that first QA workspace, they can push that change and there's no audit in any of your DevOps stuff.
So theoretically, yes, but no, because we don't have access to production. So
But we just spoke about compromised key. So if I compromise the key, and I agree that's another scenario, but what like, I mean, there's always somebody ends up with some rogue Power BI admin guy goes in and creates a new thing and he puts it in your dev. And I know this is a scenario, but that's why I don't like Power BI deployment pipelines, because it decouples. You're not deploying what's in the repo, you're deploying what was in the workspace. And that is not necessarily, I don't work in any environments that are that tight, so I have issues. People just randomly walk in and sort of change things. But
oh, so you mean that you can't see who did it?
Well, you wouldn't have, because, well, I mean, so you can obviously go into the Power BI what it looked kind of thing, right? So you would be able to, but the change wouldn't be visible in.
Yeah, you wouldn't see it on the Power BI service, but you would be able to see who reran releases and everything.
Oh, it's a service. Yeah,
Oh, right.
Service account, right? So,
Okay.
But yeah, no, there's a couple of there's a couple of.
Yeah, okay, that is a bit of a blind spot, but thing is, if you see like random releases popping up, you would get a notification for your workspace, right? So if you see that and you didn't do anything, you should probably just reset it. And you could just run like the newest release that you had, and you can reset your environment to what it was. So yes, it's annoying, but it's not.
No, it is a small little. That's I don't like deployment pipelines.
No, that's
One
very
of the
good.
reasons is that, yes.
I have a question. How difficult would it be to add additional deployment environments?
The other day it took me like an hour to add a prod
We call it
sandbox.
his Excel sheet.
Yes.
I know I do the same because I did YAML, but Excel's so much more convenient for that
Yes.
drop down here.
Yeah,
That's why I like it.
Great from a version control perspective, but it works well from a usability perspective. And we have like a couple of checks in place to actually make sure that things are fine. So if things are a bit wonky in your configuration, it will just fail.
One more thing, just in case people do have to drop off, I was going to make a quick announcement to do with your event next Thursday.
Our events.
Well, yeah, you're hosting it. Yeah, so I've got it in the chat, so it's a little bit tricky for those who are actually here in the room. The Fabric Cat team are coming to South Africa, Johannesburg, Bryanston, next week, Thursday at 6 p.m. So if you want to attend, and I certainly encourage everyone.
Just double check the time, but it wasn't as late as we usually saw. It might be 6.
Or it was 6.
Yeah, it could be 6.
All right, anyway, okay, I'll take the time out just in case it is wrong.
But you don't know who the Fabric Cat team, you probably know Patrick and Adam. It's not those two, as far as I know. But
yeah, but I mean, Casper de Jong's pretty cool. So that's cool. I've just sent the link now. And those in the room, I'll just get the meetup online and you can just
you're not invited. So.
All right, but is Vusi back yet or still not?
Vusi is back. Yeah.
Okay.
We were just doing a few announcements while we waited for your return. Yes, but you can go for it.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Dude, it is 1800. It is 1800.
Hello.
Vusi, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Microsoft.
Okay. Can anyone else online hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear us, okay. And you can hear Vusi? I don't think you can hear us.
I only hear your voice.
Or maybe we push it to the next session.
How long is that
That's
event?
what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, we can postpone it.
Microsoft's been off course for Saturday.
So
I think
Okay.
possibly so when I looked at it, talking about the fabric.
It's like half an hour.
No, between 6 and 8.
6 and 8.
Okay, it looks like Vusi is having some connection issues, so I think we can just move into the next user group, perhaps. Vusi, I don't know if you can hear us, but yeah, we hope that you can. We really appreciate for you preparing your session, and we enjoyed the first slide. But yeah, we hope to see more in the next user group. So yeah, stay tuned for that. But other than that, I just want to say a big shout out then again to Vusi and to Christiaan for presenting tonight. I really appreciate all the effort that you guys took in. Christiaan, those look like some crazy slides. It took like a long time to prepare those back in the day.
yes.
And then
I do still have like that other thing if people still want to see after the fact.
the dashboard. Okay.
Yeah, look at that.
Okay, we'll stop the recording there, and then